encouraged me to read the story of Joseph. And I'd already read it, but I read it again. And then I read it again and again. And I kind of studied it, and I've gotten, this was months ago, so now I've gotten to the point where I really feel like there was a message in it that I needed to share. Romans 8:28 says, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose." And we look at those verses and we look at the story and we go, yeah, I can see how, God worked everything out. Okay, Joseph got sold into slavery, kind of sucks for him, but in the end, everything worked out. And, we don't really get the grasp of these two verses just looking at it like that. We look at Psalm 139, verse 13. For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. And then Jeremiah 1. When we read the Psalms, we're reading them as if, we're the ones saying it. We don't look at the Psalm that David wrote, Psalm 139, and go, oh, God knew David. No, we say, God knows me. It started with Jacob and Leah and Rachel and the jealousy born there. God knew about that. God knew that there was going to be that problem with jealousy between in the entire family. God knew that whenever, that through Jacob's favoritism towards him, he was going to have a pride issue. He was going to be arrogant. I got to thinking about that as, we look at our strengths and our weaknesses and we go, I'm strong in these areas and God's using me in these areas, but, I'm still weak in these areas. Well, God's using that too.
Amen.
God saw his pride issue. We look at it and we go, okay, God kind of had his hand a little bit over here, kind of worked things out, and in the end, it all worked out for good. But then whenever you step back and look at the whole scope of it, you realize that God had him. He's not just some mystic God that's looking back and going, every now and then I'm going to. He's completely immersed in our lives. He's completely involved with, okay. Now, God had just used this weakness of pride to get the ball rolling in what he wanted. But God said, I still want that pride in you broken. I still want that weakness out of you. That's still a weakness that you have. And I'm going to put you in a place where I can start to work that out of you. And God put Joseph in a very humbling situation as a slave. Now, even though, he's got these issues and God's working on them, God still had favor on him. God still allowed him to, show his worth, to show his value, and have favor with Potiphar. So while I'm breaking down your pride in these very humbling situations, I'm also going to build you up to prepare you for what I've got coming for you.
Yeah.
Amen. We look, in our own lives and we're going, hey, I have these gifts, but I can't use them right now because I'm still working on this issue. Many of y'all know that I've got issues of my own. But I still feel like I was given a gift to teach, given a gift to study the Bible and to be able to discern things and to be able to teach them effectively. And so I'm trying to use that. Even though, I know, and y'all know that I've got issues, I'm still going to try and use my gift to the best of my ability.
Amen. Praise God.
Joseph spent between the time that he got sold into slavery to the time that he became in charge of all of Egypt was 13 years. We look at a year of Teen Challenge, we're like, man, this is a long time. This is the hardest thing. Joseph spent 13 years in slavery and imprisonment. And it was, he must have had a lot of issues if God had him in that position for 13 years that he was just breaking out of. We're never to the point where we're perfect. We're never to the point where we're not going to have any issues. We're always going to have issues. But God's still able to use us and wants us to continue to grow and wants us to, be in positions where we're breaking down those weaknesses, building up our strengths. You have searched me, Lord, and you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You are familiar with all my ways. Before a word is on my tongue, you, Lord, know it completely. You hem me in behind and before, and you lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful, too lofty for me to attain. And I didn't quite get that whenever I first read it. And after studying the story a little bit, I understood it a little better. I can't fathom how much God knows about me.
Right.
He knows more about me than I know about myself. He's able to do things that I will never be able to understand, to put things in place that I will never be able to comprehend. Even looking back on the story, okay, but why? And the more I tried to wrap my head around it, the more frustrating it got, the more confusing it got, until I finally had to go, you know what, I don't get it. I can see, I had a revelation about Joseph and how much God had involved with his life. And I feel like God allowed me to see that through, that story. But He hasn't given me the ability to see the way that He sees it, the whole big scope of things.
Right.
This story has given me a lot of comfort in my own life. It's one of my favorite stories in the Bible, because I know that God has a plan for me.
Yes.
Yeah.
I know
Amen.
that as long as I'm walking in His will, I may still have issues. I may still have things that I struggle with. But as long as I'm doing all the, pretty much what He wants, and I'm walking in His will and trying to do what He wants, in the end, eventually, all things are going to work out for good for His purpose.
Right.
For His purpose.
Yes.
One last thing, this is just kind of a little side note. Ephesians 1:11 says, "In Him we were also chosen, having been predestined according to the plan of Him who works out everything in conformity with the purpose of His will." The thing I find interesting about that verse is Paul wrote that while he was in prison.
Yeah.
And instead of being down and out about the fact that he's in prison, he's going, "Hey, I'm in prison, but everything's everything works out to His purpose."
Oh, yeah.
He's saying that His purpose was that I be in prison. He probably didn't realize this at the time, but half the letters that he wrote, or maybe not half, I know a few of the letters that he wrote were written while he was in prison. Would we have those letters if he hadn't been in prison?
Right.
He spent his last days in prison, but he knew that, hey, this is for God's purpose.
Amen.
And I'm not going to let it get me down. I know that ultimately this is for the good, and it was. He suffered, but through that we've got the letters of Paul that teach us about God and how God is, and how we can be saved through Jesus.